Ah, vintage. Oh, hello. You know, our new modern meta has now been established, and hopefully the return of the modern Pro Tour promises permanency. However, nothing can be said to be certain in this world except, of course, for Eldrazi and Taxes. Eldrazi and Taxes is a strong modern contender that can and has won GPs, but costs relatively little compared to most modern price tags. The deck works off the baseline premise of the classic legacy Death and Taxes deck, but modern Eldrazi and Taxes operates with aggressive efficiency and tremendous taxing to ensure your opponent goes bankrupt. Let's take a look. Before we get into both the Eldrazi and the Taxes, let's start with a couple of our tax collectors. A pair of Dark Confidants. Alright, let's start with the Taxes. Affectionately referred to as Bob after its designer, Dark Confidant costs 1 black and 1 mana of any color for a 2/1 human wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Greatness at any cost indeed. It amazes me that some lists do not run a pair of Bobs, as the card is not only one of the most powerful black cards in Modern, but an overwhelming threat in this deck. If your opponents can't or won't answer Dark Confidant right away, you'll overwhelm them, no question. Salia really should have just been named Thraben Tax Collector instead of Guardian or Cathar, as she is the foundation of any tax-style deck. We run a full playset of her original printing, which, aside from the playset of Aether Vials, is really one of the most expensive parts of this deck, but well worth it. For 1 and a white, she is a 2/1 first strike that makes non-creature spells cost 1 more mana to cast. This seemingly minor tax on the casting cost of non-creatures will wreak havoc with your opponent's ability to match you. And her counterpart, which we run a lone copy of, is a 3/2 first strike that makes creatures and non-basic lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Aether Vial, the other costly piece of this deck, is absolutely essential in our ideal turn 1 play regardless of matchup. Being able to threaten vialing in a Flicker Wisp with juicy targets such as Wasteland Strangler, Not Seer, Tidehollow Sculler, or Gaunty, Lord of Luxury is great, but getting tricky and using Flicker Wisp to target a key component of your opponent's, say, one of their Tron lands, during their end step is an amazing way to tilt them out. Obviously, the deck runs classic tax cards like Leonin Arbiter and Ghost Quarter. Each can be fairly brutal by themselves, but when combined, can absolutely devastate your opponent. Arbiter costs 1 and a white for a 2/2 kitty that reads, players cannot search libraries. Any player may pay 2 for that player to ignore this effect until end of turn. Even without Ghost Quarter in play, this shuts down your opponent's fetch lands, especially early game, making it an ideal turn 2 drop. With Ghost Quarter, you can outright destroy their lands if they can't pay the 2 mana tax. Are you seeing how these cards start lining up? Aether Vial into Arbiter, into Thalia, into Tidehollow Sculler, and then we just tax our opponent to death. Speaking of Tidehollow Sculler, the card has a great combo with Wasteland Strangler. For white and a black, when Tidehollow Sculler enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand, and you choose a non-land card from it. Exile that card. When Tidehollow Sculler leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. Combo this with Wasteland Strangler, which reads, when Wasteland Strangler enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. If you do, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. So you can grab a tasty target from opponent's hand with Sculler, then bring out Strangler to dump that card from exile into their graveyard, meaning that if Sculler dies or blinks, the card won't return to their hand, and then have Strangler strangle one of their creatures down -3/-3. Vial in a Strangler for surprise, or Flicker Wisp one already in play. This deck is a symphony of misery. Since we are in black, a lone Liliana of the Veil is run to help lock down our opponents. Truly the most powerful modern legal planeswalker by far, Liliana can destroy a target creature or disrupt our opponent's hand. A little costly at 2 black and 1 of any color, so we'll run only a single copy of her. As too do we run a single Gaunty, Lord of Luxury, a 2/3 with Death Touch for the luxurious cost of 2 black and 2 of any color. When Gaunty, Lord of Luxury enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. You may look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. As an alternate to these two, you can instead run 2 Mirren Crusader main board. These are more aggressive, but fantastic matchups against Grixis Death's Shadow. I'll recommend them in the sideboard here for when you're up against Death's Shadow or a meta full of green, but they can be done main board as well, so keep that in mind. We've already mentioned Wasteland Strangler, but what other Eldrazi are we running? Thought Not Seer, possibly one of the most taxing Eldrazi made, is not only a main board, but one we always run a full playset of. When Thought Not Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. When Thought Not Seer leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. This is our desired turn 4, but with Eldrazi Temple, we can Thought Not as early as turn 3. Because Seer and Strangler need colorless mana to be cast, we also run in our mana base Caves of Koilos for its ability to create colorless mana. Eldrazi Displacer is another taxing monster and can create stack tomfoolery when combined with Tidehollow Sculler. For 2 and a colorless mana, Displacer can exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So we can do the incredibly irritating blink trick of casting Tidehollow Sculler, pulling a card from our opponent's hand, then while that is still on the stack, blinking Sculler with Displacer so that the card is permanently exiled, and have Sculler come back in to grab yet another card from our opponent's hand. Disgustingly delicious. One of the most powerful removal spells in all of Modern, the deck of course is running Path to Exile. A single white mana gives us the instant ability to exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle his or her library. Of course, with Leonin Arbiter in play, this is just 1 white mana to exile one of our opponent's creatures, and no drawback besides that. We've already mentioned Caves of Koilos, Ghost Quarter, and Eldrazi Temple of the mana base, but the deck also runs Godless Shrine to help us ramp into creatures, and as a source of colorless mana, as well as Concealed Courtyard and a pair of Shambling Vents. The Shambling Vents are critical against decks like Jund and Burn, giving us much needed life gain as an answer to aggro hordes, or just direct damage spells like Bolt. What about the sideboard? Always flexible and always changing, but we'll be sure to run those Mirren Crusaders I mentioned. Again, I've even seen some decks run these main board. They're great here, but at the very least, make sure you've got them in the side. Stony Silence and Kataki, Wars Waged, tax artifacts in the matchup. Stony Silence, the classic where for 1 white and 1 of any color, you get an enchantment that makes activated abilities of artifacts so they can't be activated. And of course, the Wars Wage is a tax that says, for 1 of any color and a white, you get a 2/1 legendary spirit that taxes all artifacts, so that at the beginning of your upkeep, you would sacrifice that artifact unless you pay 1. Affinity is not going to raise any artifact army against you unless it's made of mana, which they are not. And Rest in Peace, a must-have for when we are up against graveyard strategies. Absolutely necessary these days, while Dredge is still an ever-present threat. For when removal is necessary, we run a pair of Fatal Push and a single Anguished Unmaking. Then finally, a single Blessed Alliance, as it offers us many modes of versatility. Target player can gain 4 life, helpful for us in some matchups. Or for combat shenanigans, we can untap up to 2 target creatures and or have target opponent sacrifice an attacking creature. But of course, there are many other options out there, and you can fine-tune both the side and main board to suit your play style, or simply the decks that you keep encountering at your meta. All in all, the deck is strong, highly competitive, and highly affordable compared to other modern deck prices. But it's modern, so at the end of the day, 'tis impossible to be certain of anything except, of course, Eldrazi and Taxes. I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. You can help me out by remembering to like, share, subscribe, or just by leaving a message. What deck and format would you like to see a tech on next? Let me know in the comments below. And this video is brought to you by my and many other people's local game store, Card Kingdom, a brick-and-mortar pillar of this community, as well as the Patreon support of viewers such as you. These are the people that keep Tolarian Community College going and growing strong. So thank you.